What happens when a woman is dismissed and humiliated by a bank teller, only to return as the owner of the bank? You won't believe the powerful twist that teaches everyone a lesson in respect, kindness, and second chances. Watch now to see how Elena's incredible journey unfolds, proving that success is the best answer to judgment. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to inspire others with this powerful tale. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. The bank sat in the heart of the small town, its grand stone facade a relic of a bygone era. The high ceilings inside were adorned with ornate moldings, and the air carried the faint scent of polished wood and aged paper. It was the kind of place where everyone whispered, where rules were strictly followed, and where appearances mattered more than they should. The employees moved with precision behind the long counters, their pressed uniforms and stern expressions reflecting the bank's reputation for formality. Customers stood in neat lines, clutching their forms and checks, careful not to draw undue attention to themselves. That morning, Elena stepped through the heavy glass doors. In her early 40s, she was a picture of quiet strength, her modest attire, a simple blouse and worn slacks, blending into the understated background of the bank. Her dark hair was tied back loosely, and her face carried the gentle lines of someone who had worked hard her entire life. Despite her modest appearance, there was something about the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were squared, her posture confident, and her eyes calm but focused. It wasn't the confidence of wealth or privilege, it was the quiet assurance of someone who had faced life's challenges head-on and come out stronger. As Elena walked toward the counter, a few heads turned, though most quickly returned to their business. She didn't exude flashiness or extravagance, but there was a subtle energy about her that hinted at a story far deeper than her simple clothes suggested. Elena stepped up to the counter, her movements deliberate and calm. Behind the desk stood Chris, a young teller in his mid-20s, with a neatly pressed shirt and a tie that looked slightly too tight. He greeted her with a professional smile, though it faltered slightly as he took in her appearance. "Good morning," Elena said, her voice steady and polite. She slid a check across the polished counter. "I'd like to cash this, please." Chris picked up the check and immediately noticed the amount. His brows lifted, and his lips pressed into a tight line. It wasn't every day he saw a figure that large in their small-town bank. He glanced at Elena, his eyes scanning her simple clothes and unadorned accessories. Chris murmured, his tone shifting slightly. "Let me take a look." He typed something into the computer, the clatter of the keyboard breaking the quiet hum of the bank. As he worked, his demeanor cooled, and his professionalism was replaced by something harder to miss: doubt. "Ma'am," Chris said finally, holding the check up as if to inspect it closer. "This is quite a substantial amount. Are you sure you're at the right bank?" Elena tilted her head slightly, her calm gaze meeting his. "Yes," she replied evenly. "This is my bank, and I'd like to cash it here." Chris raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth curling into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. "I see. I'll need to confirm a few things." Though his words were courteous enough, the look in his eyes told a different story. One of judgment and disbelief. To him, this woman, with her modest appearance and quiet demeanor, couldn't possibly have the means to cash a check like this. Without waiting for her response, he turned toward a supervisor. Already assuming something wasn't adding up, Chris turned the check over in his hands, inspecting every detail as if he were searching for a flaw. His demeanor shifted entirely, and his earlier politeness gave way to open skepticism. He glanced up at Elena again, his expression firm, almost condescending. "This is quite an amount," he said, his tone heavy with doubt. "I'm going to need to verify this with our system. You understand, of course." Elena nodded calmly. "Of course." Chris leaned toward his computer, tapping furiously on the keyboard while stealing occasional glances at Elena. His demeanor wasn't just professional caution, it carried an air of arrogance, as though he was sure the check wouldn't hold up under scrutiny. "So," Chris said, his voice laced with thinly veiled sarcasm, "where exactly did you get this check? It's not every day we see someone walk in with a figure like this." Elena's face remained composed. "It's from one of my business transactions," she replied simply. Chris blinked, his eyebrows arching in exaggerated surprise. "A business transaction?" he repeated, as though the idea itself was implausible. Do you have any documentation to prove this? Elena's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her tone measured. The check is legitimate. I can assure you of that. Chris leaned back in his chair, holding the check up as if appraising a counterfeit bill. I see, he said slowly, dragging out the words. It's just, we have to be cautious. You wouldn't believe how often people try to pull something. He smirked slightly, almost as if expecting her to fumble for an excuse or back down. The quiet snickers of another staff member nearby added to the air of humiliation. Elena remained silent, her calm gaze unwavering as she watched Chris, who seemed more intent on doubting her than doing his job. It was clear that he had already made up his mind about her, not based on facts, but on his own prejudice. Chris sighed dramatically, setting the check down on the counter with a sharp tap that echoed through the quiet bank. He leaned forward, his voice rising enough for others to hear. I'm sorry, ma'am, he said, his tone dripping with finality, but I can't process this check. It doesn't seem credible. Heads began to turn. Customers in the line shifted uncomfortably, and a few exchanged curious glances. Even the other bank employees paused, looking over to see what the commotion was about. Elena felt the weight of their stares, but she stayed composed, her hands resting calmly on the counter. Why do you say that? She asked, her voice steady. Chris crossed his arms, his lips curling into a faint, dismissive smile. Well, for starters, checks for this kind of amount aren't something we typically handle without proper documentation. And with all due respect, people don't usually walk in off the street looking like this to cash something so significant. The implication in his words hung heavy in the air. A few customers gasped softly while others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with his blatant judgment. Elena's cheeks flushed slightly, but not with embarrassment. With quiet anger she refused to let show. She took a deep breath. I've told you, the check is legitimate, she said firmly. I'm a customer at this bank, and I have every right to cash it. Chris gave a slight shrug, raising his hands as if absolving himself of any blame. I'm just doing my job, ma'am, he said, though the smugness in his voice suggested otherwise. Maybe you should try another bank, or double-check where this check really came from. The humiliation was palpable. People whispered behind her, and Elena could feel the burn of judgment from every direction. Still, she stood tall, refusing to let Chris see her falter. Without another word, she picked up the check and calmly walked out of the bank, her head held high. Though her outward composure remained intact, inside she felt the sting of unfairness. Not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been dismissed, judged, or belittled for how they looked. Elena grew up in the kind of small town where opportunities felt like a distant dream. Her family lived in a modest house on the edge of town, where the roof always seemed to leak, and every penny was stretched thin. Her parents worked tirelessly, her mother as a seamstress and her father at a local factory, but there was never quite enough to go around. From a young age, Elena understood the value of hard work. By the time she was 12, she was helping her mother sew clothes for extra income. The rhythmic hum of the sewing machine became the soundtrack of her childhood, and though the work was tiring, it ignited a spark in her, a dream of something more. As a teenager, Elena juggled school with part-time jobs, from waitressing at the town diner to cleaning offices late at night. Her earnings went straight to helping her family, but she always set aside a small portion to fuel her growing passion, business. Elena had a natural gift for seeing possibilities where others saw problems. She began experimenting with small ventures like selling handmade scarves or organizing garage sales for neighbors. Her ideas were simple, but they worked, and the satisfaction of building something from nothing planted a seed of ambition in her heart. After high school, Elena couldn't afford college, but she didn't let that stop her. She devoured every book she could find on entrepreneurship, borrowed from libraries and second-hand stores. By her mid-20s, she had saved enough to start her first small business, a tiny kiosk selling handmade accessories at the local market. It wasn't easy. There were days when sales were slow and nights when doubt crept in, but Elena's determination never wavered. She worked tirelessly, reinvesting every bit of profit back into her business. Over the years, her little kiosk grew into a thriving brand, known for its unique designs and quality. Through grit, resilience, and sheer brilliance, Elena built a company that not only provided for her family but also employed others in her community. Her success wasn't handed to her, it was earned through sweat, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in herself. Though she now lived a more comfortable life, Elena never forgot where she came from. Her modest appearance wasn't a reflection of her bank balance, but of her values. To her, wealth wasn't about flaunting possessions, it was about creating opportunities and staying true to her roots. And yet, no matter how far she had come, moments like the one at the bank reminded her that the world often judged people based on appearances. But Elena knew better. She had lived it. And she wasn't about to let anyone's short-sightedness dictate her worth. As Elena stepped out of the bank into the crisp morning air, the humiliation still lingered, but it didn't weigh her down. She held the check tightly in her hand, her steps purposeful, as she walked away from the imposing building. Her mind was racing, not with anger, but with resolve. This wasn't the first time she had been underestimated. Life had thrown her countless moments like this, times when people judged her by her clothes, her background, or the way she carried herself. Each time she had quietly risen above, proving them wrong not with words, but with actions. She paused for a moment, looking back at the bank. The polished glass doors reflected the bustling life of the town, but inside those walls, the mindset was stuck in another era, one where appearances seemed to define worth. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't about revenge. She didn't believe in tearing people down, no matter how much they had wronged her. But she did believe in lessons, powerful, lasting ones that could change perspectives and make people think twice before judging someone unfairly. Her mind was already working on a plan. She thought about the people like her, those who had been dismissed, looked down upon, or denied opportunities because they didn't fit someone else's narrow view of success. This was bigger than just her. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. Elena smiled to herself, a quiet, determined smile. She didn't need to yell or fight back in the moment. She had something far more powerful, the ability to create change in a way that no one could ignore. As she walked away, she wasn't just leaving the bank behind, she was stepping into the next chapter of her journey, one where she would remind the world that dignity and respect are not optional, they're essential. Weeks passed, and the small-town bank buzzed with nervous energy. Rumors had been swirling for days, whispers of a buyout, a mysterious new owner set to take over. The staff speculated endlessly in hushed conversations during breaks, their curiosity tinged with anxiety. Change wasn't something they welcomed easily, especially not in an institution as rigid and traditional as theirs. Chris, in particular, was on edge. He had overheard snippets of conversations about new leadership and a fresh vision, and it left him uneasy. He prided himself on maintaining the status quo, and the thought of someone disrupting the routine unsettled him. The day of the announcement arrived, and the air in the bank was thick with anticipation. The staff gathered in the main hall, standing nervously near the counters as a senior manager stepped forward. "We're excited to announce the arrival of our new owner," the manager began, his voice formal but laced with enthusiasm. "This is a monumental moment for our bank, and I believe you'll all agree that the future looks brighter than ever under their leadership." The room fell silent as the heavy glass doors opened, and a figure walked in. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the crowd, and then the murmurs stopped altogether. Elena stepped into the bank, this time dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit that radiated elegance and authority. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she approached the gathered staff, her posture confident and poised. Chris's jaw dropped. He recognized her instantly, his face draining of color. It was the same woman he had dismissed and humiliated just weeks earlier. The memory of his scornful remarks played vividly in his mind, and he could hardly believe what he was seeing. The manager smiled warmly, gesturing toward Elena. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Elena Davis, the new owner of this bank." The room erupted in polite applause, though the shock was evident on everyone's faces. Elena stood before them, her calm gaze sweeping across the crowd, landing briefly on Chris. Her expression was unreadable. No anger, no gloating, just the quiet composure that had always defined her. "Thank you," Elena said, her voice steady and gracious. "I'm honored to be here and to have the opportunity to lead this institution. I believe in the power of respect, integrity, and creating an environment where everyone feels valued, customers and employees alike." Her words carried weight, her tone gentle but firm. Chris felt his stomach twist. He knew exactly what she was referring to, though she hadn't called him out directly. It was her way of making a point, and it was far more impactful than any public reprimand could have been. As Elena continued to speak, outlining her vision for the bank's future, Chris stood frozen, realizing that this moment wasn't just a twist of fate, it was a lesson he would never forget. As Elena finished her speech, a wave of stunned silence washed over the room. Chris stood rooted to the spot, his mind racing. He replayed the moment she had approached his counter, her polite demeanor, the check he had dismissed, and the judgmental remarks he had so casually thrown at her. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The woman he had deemed unworthy, who he had humiliated in front of staff and customers, was now the owner of the very institution where he worked. The weight of his actions hit him like a tidal wave. The other staff members were no less shocked. A few exchanged wide-eyed glances, their disbelief plain to see. Some had overheard Chris's comments that day, others had made their own silent judgments about Elena's appearance. Now all of them stood face to face with the truth they had so thoroughly missed. One of the older tellers, Susan, leaned over to whisper to a colleague, her voice barely audible. "Isn't that the same woman from that day?" "It's her," the colleague murmured back, eyes wide. "I can't believe it." Chris's hands clenched into fists at his sides as embarrassment and regret churned inside him. He felt the eyes of his coworkers darting toward him, as if silently accusing him. He wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the floor, but he couldn't. Elena's presence commanded the room, not with arrogance, but with an unshakable grace. She wasn't there to rub her success in anyone's face, yet her very existence as their new leader was a testament to the strength and dignity they had all overlooked. Finally, Chris's gaze met Elena's for a brief fleeting moment. Her expression was calm, almost kind, but there was a depth in her eyes that spoke volumes. It wasn't anger or revenge, it was a quiet reminder of what he had failed to see that day. For the rest of the staff, the shock turned into admiration, mingled with a sense of shame. They realized they had judged someone based on appearances and assumptions, failing to recognize the incredible story that lay beneath. It was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Elena stood before the staff, her posture still composed, but there was a warmth in her gaze that put everyone at ease. She had every right to reprimand Chris publicly, to make an example of him, but that wasn't her way. Instead, she chose to address the room with the same grace she had always carried, using her position not for power, but to teach. "Everyone," she began, her voice calm and measured, "I want to talk to you about something that's far more important than any transaction we make here." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "It's about respect. It's about how we treat each other, whether it's our customers, our colleagues, or anyone who walks through these doors." Elena's eyes lingered on Chris for a moment, and he felt the sting of his earlier actions come rushing back. But instead of judgment, there was understanding. "I know this bank has always prided itself on its policies, its systems, and its traditions," she continued. "But policies aren't the foundation of any successful institution. The foundation is how we make people feel. When we judge others based on appearances, we not only limit their potential, we limit our own." Chris shifted uncomfortably, his face burning. He had expected the usual corporate speech, maybe a swift rebuke, but not this. Elena wasn't here to tear anyone down, she was here to build them up. "I believe in second chances," Elena said, her tone warm but firm. "None of us are perfect, I've made mistakes too, but what matters is how we learn from them, how we choose to be better." "Chris," she added, looking directly at him, "I'm not here to fire you. I'm here to give you an opportunity to grow." The room went silent, all eyes on Chris, who was now standing motionless, his mouth slightly agape. "Everyone makes mistakes," Elena said, her words gentle but carrying a quiet strength. "And sometimes, it's not about what we do, but how we choose to respond." I'm offering you and all of you the chance to reflect on what respect truly means. It's not just about following rules or policies, it's about treating every person with dignity, no matter their background, their appearance, or their status. She took a step closer to the group, her gaze sweeping over the staff, now visibly moved by her words. We all have the power to make this a place where everyone feels welcome, she said. That's the kind of environment I want to build here. A place where kindness and humility are at the core of everything we do. Chris stood there, speechless, but a part of him, deep down, knew he would never forget this moment. Elena wasn't just giving him a second chance, she was teaching him the kind of leadership and compassion he had never experienced before. And for the first time in his life, Chris felt the weight of his actions in a way that changed him, not through shame, but through understanding. As Elena left the bank, later that afternoon, the weight of the day began to settle on her. She stood outside for a moment, taking a deep breath, looking up at the sky, feeling the cool breeze against her skin. The town had always been small, but today it felt just a little bit bigger, a little bit better. Her journey had been long, filled with ups and downs, struggles and triumphs. From a young girl working multiple jobs to help her family, to a woman who had built a successful business with nothing but determination and grit, Elena had always stayed true to her core values. Success had never been about the money or the recognition. It had always been about resilience, kindness, and the belief that every person had something valuable to offer. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone, least of all the bank staff, who had once underestimated her. She had learned that the most powerful form of success wasn't about showing others how much you had achieved. It was about showing them the strength of your character, the depth of your compassion, and the ability to forgive, grow, and lift others up. As she walked away from the bank, Elena couldn't help but reflect on the many faces she'd encountered throughout her life, the ones who had dismissed her, the ones who had believed in her, and the ones who had simply never taken the time to understand her. She had learned to rise above it all, not by fighting back with anger, but by proving that true power comes from within, through perseverance, humility, and a deep sense of respect for others. The day's events had reminded her of something she held close to her heart. Never judge someone by their appearance. Everyone has a story, and every person deserves to be treated with kindness and dignity, no matter where they come from or how they look. Elena smiled softly to herself. This moment was hers, but it wasn't about her. It was about the lesson that had been taught, one that would ripple out into the world, inspiring others to lead with empathy and understanding. Because in the end, it wasn't the size of your bank account or the title you held that defined you. It was the way you treated others, and the way you chose to lift them up. And that was something Elena had always believed, long before she became the owner of the bank. Thank you so much for watching. I hope Elena's story inspired you to believe in your own power, and always stay true to yourself, no matter the obstacles. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to like, comment, and share it with your friends. Your support really means a lot. And if you haven't subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button so you never miss a new story. I can't wait to share more amazing stories with you. See you next time.